With around 2,000 horsepower at a whopping 75 PSI of boost, the Maatouks King 32 R32 Nissan GTR is the fastest street-legal R32 anywhere in the world. We're here with Mitch, head tuner at Maatouks Racing, to find out exactly how they got that time out of the car. So Mitch, obviously the Skyline drag racing world is a pretty competitive place, and you've beaten basically everyone in a street legal car, at least anyway. There's a lot into this car, it's pretty popular and everyone wants to know what's gone into it. Can we start by talking about the engine? And in a world where everyone's reaching for billet blocks these days, Maatouks have actually stuck with a cast iron RB30 block. Give us the specs of the build for a start, and then we'll get into that cast versus billet discussion.
Yeah, for sure. So King 32 still runs a cast Nissan RB block. Inside that, it's got a Nitto 3.2 litre stroker kit. On top of the block, we've got one of our Maatouks Racing full cylinder head packages. So that's our custom camshaft CNC program, full shimless conversion, that sort of stuff. It's pretty basic, I guess you could say, so no real secrets.
So probably not what a lot of people are thinking about there. Just, you mentioned there the shimless conversion. Can you give us a little bit more information on what exactly you mean by that? The Nissan RB26 cylinder head uses a direct bucket valve actuation where the camshaft runs against the bucket, and then there's in stock form a shim underneath to set the valve lash. So what's your shimless conversion consist of?
So basically, exactly right. So factory, you've got the valve with a shim on top of the valve and then the bucket that lives over that. So we completely do away with those shims. So there's no opportunity for the buckets to jump up and the shims to pop out. So each individual bucket has a thickness that we use to get our clearances right. So that way there's no chance for any shims to pop out and move around.
So is this really a problem that you only see at high RPM, because the RB26 cylinder head is already pretty well respected for its operation up to, let's say, 8,000 plus RPM?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So very high RPM, and also if there's any occurrence of like two-step RPM limiters or hitting the main rev limiter, that can be really harsh on the exhaust side of the valve train. So it does away with all of that potential problem.
All right, so that Nitto 3.2 litre stroker kit, that necessitates getting rid of the stock RB26 block and swapping in the RB30 with a taller deck height. Yep. So again, we get to this debate about cast iron versus billet, and obviously you're making the power with a cast iron block. Where do you see the limitations for that cast iron material, and are you going to move to a billet block?
Yeah, so limitations with the cast iron, at the moment we haven't found it in terms of power. We find some limitations in terms of longevity. So the blocks do get tired. You do get some ovaling of the bores after 30, 40 passes. Apart from that, we are going to keep pushing the cast iron block into the sixes with this car for sure. And then once that's done, then we'll focus on doing a new engine program for this car with a billet block.
I think I'll just dive into that a little bit, because I think that is an aspect that a lot of viewers out there probably don't really respect, is at this sort of power level, just about every component in the engine really can be considered a consumable, and that's where the advantage of that billet material is. It is much stronger, so you get the reliability over the long term. All right, so in terms of the oiling system, can you let us know what's been done there? Again, particularly in a circuit race application, we know this is one of the potential pitfalls of the RB26. Yep. So what are you running for drag racing?
Yep, so probably very similar to a lot of the circuit racing cars. So it runs a full dry sump setup. Probably only thing that we do a little bit differently is we have our dry sump tank in the front of the car. We don't really care much for weight distribution as you would in a circuit car. So we've got the dry sump tank in the front here, and then we've got a pretty comprehensive like catch tank system. So there's no chance of any oil escaping out of the oiling system.
I think that's another area that probably a lot of people aren't aware of, that breather system, which you obviously have to have with every engine, and the engine will breathe, particularly if there is a problem. If you do melt a piston or something like that happens, then you can, depending how your your catch can system is plumbed, it is possible to end up with oil under the tyres, which obviously no one wants. So where have you actually put that catch can? How do you prevent that?
Yeah, so we run the breather out of the sump tank in the front. We run that through the cabin and into a separate catch tank in the boot, and that has a separate baffling system, just so there's absolutely no chance of any oil getting out of the car.
I guess if anything does get out, it's going to end up behind the rear wheels anyway. All right, so let's talk about the turbocharger. Obviously, that's the heart to getting the airflow into that engine. What are you running there?
Yep, this car runs a Precision Pro Mod 91.
Now, you've got 3.2 litres, so it's a fairly decent sized engine, but still that Pro Mod 91mm turbo is also a big turbocharger. Is there a fine balance between getting sufficient boost response to get the car up onto the trans brake on the start line compared to sort of limiting the power at high RPM, maximum boost down the track?
Yeah, so to get this up on the two-step limiter to get the car out of the hole, that's impossible without a shot of nitrous. Yeah, with that, there's really no issues. If we didn't have the nitrous, there's no way you'd be able to get the thing out of the hole.
Is there potential or consideration to move to a bigger turbo, or you've still got some more headroom left in that 91mm turbo?
Yep, there's still some headroom with the 91. Again, we'll probably be confident we can get into the 6s with this turbo. If not, yeah, we'll be moving to a 94 or something like that.
Now, in maximum boost numbers, you've said that it's running 75 PSI or thereabouts in the deep end. Of course, you've got to also base the power delivery or sort of the profile of power delivery as the car goes down the track to maximise your available grip. So what strategies are you using in the ECU to do that? Are you using boost versus gear or boost versus speed?
Yep, so we do all of our boost control over time. And we use a couple of methods to control that boost. So we've got CO2 Boost Control, which is controlled directly from the Haltech Elite ECU. And then we actually have a bleed valve on the intercooler pipe that bleeds any excess boost off that we may not quite need just yet.
Okay, so just jumping back to that CO2 boost control, again, that's a technique that is quite common in drag racing terms, but definitely a lot of the street customers out there watching this may not be aware of how that works. So can you give us a little bit of insight there?
Yeah, for sure. So we've got a pressurized vessel of CO2 in the cabin. We've got a regulator on that regulates that bottle pressure down to about 150 pounds. You've then got a couple of solenoids. They basically just apply or release pressure onto the hat of the wastegate. That basically allows us to directly control the amount of pressure on top of the gate and therefore the boost that the turbo is producing.
And I think the real sort of key to that is that when you're using an external wastegate in a conventional sense, you're only using boost pressure acting on that wastegate. Yep. There's a limit to the extremes from the minimum boost to the maximum boost that you can run. And of course, in drag racing terms, when you're trying to get to 75 PSI, if you were to do that with a conventional spring, you're going to be running way too much boost off the line in order to be able to get to that 75 PSI. So by using compressed air control, so that CO2 regulated to 150 PSI, it gives you that wider spread. Is that a sort of fair synopsis of it?
Yeah, 100%. It also, what I've found is it also reduces the length of the control loop. So if you've got manifold pressure feeding a solenoid, feeding your wastegate, versus having that compressed CO2 there with a short run onto the top of the gate, we found that's a little bit more responsive, especially when you need such fine control of that boost over such small periods of time. Yeah. Right,
so you've mentioned the electronics there, the Haltech Elite 2500 ECU. Can you give us a rundown on what features in the ECU you're using to really get the most out of this car and sort of, again, adjust that power delivery to suit the track conditions?
Yeah, for sure. So at the start of the run, the ECU is controlling the trans brake and the bump in that Anthony does use when he's racing the car. The ECU is also controlling the nitrous system and, of course, the CO2 boost control. All of that's all done through all the timers in the ECU. So not only is the ECU doing fuel ignition, it's also doing boost control, transmission control, nitrous control, and obviously all of our data logging is done in the ECU as well.
Now there's a bunch of stuff I want to jump into there, but you have also just talked about the fuel delivery, and one of the aspects there we can see on the Hypertune plenum chamber, it is running 2 sets of injectors. Again, not at all uncommon at this sort of power level when you're running on E85 fuel. Yep. Are you controlling that in a staged way through the Haltech?
Not in this car, no. So this car, we just pair the injectors together with the high current injector drivers on the Haltech Elite. We're able to do that, and yeah, it's been really quite successful.
So normally staged injection is used to provide better control of the fuel delivery at idle, but of course in a drag application, the idle quality is not really that useful or important, despite the fact this is actually a street legal car. So that's why you can get away with that?
Yep, 100%.
Now, you've talked about the bump function there, and that corresponds with the automatic transmission. Now, this is another area that the King 32 obviously differs from the stock five-speed manual transmission. And this is where we've seen a lot of, I think, the development in the GTRs in terms of drag times coming down. Traditionally, everyone's sort of gone about it with a manual transmission, and we see that particularly on the shift, it can really upset the car and make it hard to control. So is the automatic transmission sort of one of the keys to getting down to these flat 7 times and into the 6s, or can it be done on a manual transmission?
Yeah, look, don't get me wrong, there's definitely a pretty steep learning curve to get one of these automatic transmissions to work properly. You've got the whole converter tuning and yeah, getting that launch correct. It's definitely a lot easier than a manual transmission though. So yeah, as you were saying before, it's a lot more stable with the car going down the track. You don't have to worry about the gear changes being harsh on the suspension and trying to send you into walls and things like that. Yeah.
How many gears in this particular auto trans?
This has got a turbo 400 3-speed.
Now, you've mentioned there about the torque converter, and this is one of the problems with a small capacity turbocharged car. We've talked about using the nitrous to get the car to come up onto the torque converter to start with. And you've just also mentioned earlier the bump function in the Haltech. Can you explain to us what that is and how that works?
Yeah, so the bump box basically lets Anthony bring the car into stage and then get the car up on the trans brake. And so it's basically sitting there ready at full power, ready to launch. He can then bump the car into full stage, and then that way it just sort of gives him a little bit more time to get ready, set the car up, and also give his, whoever he's racing the opportunity to get in as well. Yeah.
I think conventionally we see with cars that don't have that function with an automatic transmission, it does, even with nitrous, it can take some time to get the engine up onto full power, ready to launch. So you sort of come into full stage and then it can take potentially a couple of seconds, and if the tree comes down, your competitor's gone. It's hard to win a race when you're still sitting there on the start line. So that allows you, as you've said there, you come in and by the time you've got the second lights on the tree, you're already at full power. As soon as the tree comes down, you're ready to go, yeah?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
All right, so moving back from the transmission as well. So obviously the automatic transmission, those Turbo 400s normally are a rear-wheel drive application, and the R32 GTR has a four-wheel drive transmission, a four-wheel drive drivetrain, I should say. You're still incorporating that though, so how do you go about that with the automatic?
Yeah, so we basically remove the rear housing off the transmission. We have a billet adapter plate that goes on the rear of the transmission that then the factory Nissan transfer case basically bolts straight onto that.
So as far as that Nissan transfer case is concerned, everything's still just the same as factory?
Yeah, exactly. So it's still hydraulically operated, using all the factory pumps and solenoids. And yeah, we use all the factory transfer case exactly as it was from Nissan.
Okay, so this is another function that I want to talk about here, that transfer case, because it is controllable via the hydraulic pressure, you can essentially adjust and control the torque split through to the front axle. And we've seen all sorts of competitors do funny things or different things with these to try and gain an advantage. Is there anything you're doing here with King 32 to try and optimize its performance on the drag strip?
Yeah, so from factory, obviously it's a 30-year-old system, probably pretty advanced for being 30 years old. Factory system uses a combination of wheel speed sensors and G-force sensors. In a drag racing application, we found that the factory setup just really wasn't working for us. So we've actually removed all of the factory electronics that control the four-wheel drive system, and we actually run that hydraulic torque split directly from the Haltech ECU. Okay,
so with that torque split, when you're putting drive through the front wheels, obviously the aim there is to improve traction, which could be great off the line, maybe the first half of the track. But as you get to the deep end of the track where you're probably a little bit less traction limited, that can be the advantage to actually being rear-wheel drive. So are you doing anything with reducing or increasing that torque split depending on where the car is on the track?
Yeah, exactly as you mentioned. So again, everything is controlled over time in this car. Exactly, again, as you said, at the hit, we've got pretty much a 50-50 split of four-wheel drive. once we've passed that 60 foot and past that half track mark where we may not need that four-wheel drive gripper anymore, exactly, we dial that torque split down a little bit. It still is four-wheel drive over the end of the quarter mile. We never ever bleed it back completely to rear-wheel drive. Anthony finds the car drives a lot better with some torque to the front wheels. But yeah, exactly right. We start at the launch 50-50, and by the end of the track, we've got a little bit more rear bias.
Okay, so from a tuner's perspective, you've got a car here that you're looking after that probably on most race tracks has got more power than it can put to the ground just about anywhere. So it's always sort of walking that tightrope of power versus where you are on the track. When the car comes back from a quarter mile pass, what are you looking at in the data to base your decisions on what to do to improve the car for the next pass?
Yeah, so basically looking at the engine data out of the ECU versus what we're seeing on the time slip. So every pass we're always making minor changes to the tune-up and to the power delivery. So basically we're comparing the changes that we've made to the time slip to see if those changes are working. That obviously changes track to track as well. What works here in Sydney may not work at Willowbank in Queensland.
A lot of drag cars at this sort of level are starting to use traction control or profiling the torque or drive shaft speed versus time down the drag strip. Are you doing anything like that, or are you doing the old-fashioned manual way?
Yeah, look, we do have a drive shaft RPM sensor on this that runs into the race pack data logger. We purely just use that for exactly that, just data logging. We don't do any reactive or call closed loop traction control in this car.
All right, we've talked about the automatic transmission there, a bit of a move away from factory Nissan componentry, and one more component that's definitely away from the factory stuff is the rear end. Now, despite the fact that it did run that 700, 199 mile an hour pass with the stock R200 Nissan rear end, you've actually moved away from that now. Can you tell us what you've done?
Yeah, we put a whole new suspension setup in the car, and when we moved to that new setup, we were finding that the rear diff just couldn't keep up with the grip level that the car now had. I think in one event we broke, I think, over 5 or 6 diffs, and the guys were pretty good at changing those out. But yeah, we just found that with the new suspension, couldn't keep up with the grip level, so we had to get rid of the Nissan setup and move to something that could take the power. The natural progression from that was to fit a forward 9-inch IRS into the rear end.
Oh, so it is still an independent rear suspension. A lot of people at this level would be going to a live rear end, so still retaining the stock style independent.
Yep. So yeah, so Dean from Ravage Raceworks up in Queensland, he basically took the stock Nissan subframe and grafted in a 9-inch centre into that, made us up some custom CV shafts for it, and yeah, it all works brilliantly now.
Okay, good to hear. Now, I just want to go back a little bit as well. You've talked about that nitrous system and the fact that it's used to bring the turbo up on boost as Anthony stages the car. Is it still sprayed down the track, and if so, is that a manual aspect that Anthony's doing, or is it computer controlled?
Yeah, so once Anthony flicks the arm switch in the car, the stage of nitrous that brings the car up on the converter, that's fully automated. He doesn't need to worry about that. He then does have a button on his steering wheel that he can and does press down the track when he feels like the car can take it. Whether that happens, a second into the run or 5 seconds into the run, that's completely up to him and and how he's feeling the car is planted on the track.
And what sort of size nitrous shot are you actually feeding into it?
Whatever the drill bit that Anthony picked out of the toolbox was.
So fair to say, based on the size of the solenoids, it's a pretty big hit.
Yeah, it's not small by any means, yeah.
All right, I think the other thing that's really important for people out there to understand is that this genuinely is a full weight street car. It's still running electric windows, it's still got all of the mod cons, and you literally can drive it on the street. Can you tell us what it weighs?
I think the last time we had it on the weighbridge, it was almost 1,500 kilos, I believe.
So it's definitely no lightweight, which makes the 700-199 even more spectacular. Look, thanks for the time there to go over that car, and we are quite sure that in the near future we're going to see that into the 6s. So good luck with that, and thanks for showing us around the car.
Yeah, cool. No worries.
If you like that video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, and if you're not already a subscriber, make sure you're subscribed. We release a new video every week. And if you like free stuff, we've got a great deal for you. Click the link in the description to claim your free spot to our next live lesson.